Tonight on Free Minds TV, tourists coming to the United States may be charged a fee for entering the country. Last week's threat was a llama, but this week we're going to be dealing with a giant woolly rat. We'll also be dealing with a Downsizer Dispatch, plus a whole lot more. All coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
And welcome to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV. It is episode 126, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. And as always, it is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
All right, we have a ton of show content to get to today. We do have an update on that llama. Remember the renegade llama who was tasered and shot by police, but was still out on the lam? We've got an update of that, as well as a new threat coming down the pipe in the second half of today's show. But first, I wanted to start off by bouncing around other parts of the world and pointing out where governments are just, well, growing a little bit too big and screwing things up. Let's start off with kind of a sad, but, well, it's kind of humorous, sad at the same time. Let's go over to the UK, where the nanny state is at it again. And this time, they're teaming up with the Boy Scouts to make sure that children are never fully given the tools they need to survive in this world. Well, it's to protect them, of course, those little snowflakes. We don't want to damage their delicate edges, and make sure that they can grow up all the way to 18 years of age before they know anything about the world. And the Boy Scouts, along with the nanny staters in the UK, are saying that Scouts should no longer have pocket knives. Yes, well, to be truthful, the Scouts haven't had pocket knives for a number of years. A few years ago, the nanny staters said that Scouts' parents could come on camping trips and other places where there would be knives and hold the knives for them. And so, under proper supervision, the little Scouts could learn to use a knife. But now, the nanny staters say having parents have the knives is just too dangerous, and we need to get rid of knives altogether. When these little snowflakes grow up and turn 18, they can have all the knowledge of the world, but until then we need to protect them and make sure that they're never learning about knives. Now, Nick, I was a scout when I was younger, and one of the first things that they taught me about was learning how to use a knife. I mean, it was basics 101. You will be using a knife in many times in life, and it's very important that you know how to use one properly.
It's one of the basic lessons that you're supposed to learn in scouting is how to use a knife, how, the safety aspect of it too, how not to cut yourself, how you cut away from yourself and not towards yourself.
It's a lot of basics, but I mean, if a kid doesn't learn them, they might not know how to use them correctly. And so it's something that is basic, but is very important for adults to be teaching to kids. I mean, it's one of the main reasons the Boy Scouts really has some things going for it, in my opinion.
They teach basic life skills. They're not all terribly useful. I mean, not that many people are going to have to actually build a campfire, but it does give kids some self-esteem, and it actually teaches them, I can actually learn how to do things in life. There's a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction there, and it might lead them to go on and want to learn about other things that they're going to have to know how to do in life.
Yeah, and it also teaches the basics. So they don't turn 18, and the first time they're introduced to a knife is when they go to the store and buy one, so that they know the basic safety features of a knife and are able to do so without hurting themselves. So it does amaze me that it's been a number of years since since Scouts were allowed to have knives, and parents always had to bring them on the trip. Now parents aren't even allowed to bring knives on the trip to show the kids under proper supervision. The nanny state has done it again. They've outbested themselves. So good for you, nanny staters. It really sucks to be a kid growing up in the UK right now, and as well as other parts of the world where the nanny staters are really overprotecting them to the point where they're not going to be able to survive in the real world when they move on. They do turn 18. We suddenly expect them to magically be granted all the abilities that adults have. It's going to be very sad to see the next generation of these little pansy snowflakes over there. All right, moving right along. Let's truck along. We can't just pick on the nanny state in the UK. Let's go over to Germany, where they've gotten some really draconian laws to try to regulate CO2 and help with the global climate change. But I believe things are going a step further, Nick.
Well, this isn't really a law yet, but what is happening is that the top climate advisor to the German government, a scientist by the name of Joachim Schulenhuber, is saying that people should have to pay taxes on the carbon that they emit. Basically, they have to keep any excess carbon that they emit. So every person on the planet, according to Joachim here, should have to stay within a CO2 budget. and anyone who exceeds it would have to pay what's essentially a tax. Now he goes a step further by saying that Westerners, people in the United States and Europe and other developed industrialized countries, already far exceed their CO2 budgets by and large. So Western developed nations should have to pay climate reparations to other less developed countries that don't emit as much CO2 because, well, most people there don't own cars, there's not as much heavy industry, and something on the order of at least $142 billion a year every year should be spent on climate reparations, which seems a little bit absurd to me. I mean, it's very difficult to actually isolate what kind of damage has been done specifically by climate change, let alone what damage has been done by human-generated climate change, if there is any.
And who specifically is responsible? What if I live in one of these Western civilizations, but I live a very green life? I don't make a huge carbon footprint of my own. Am I still supposed to be paying tax dollars for my fellow countrymen who are driving around in Suburbans and such? Is there a way that they're I guess they'd really have to track each individual if they were going to really see who's responsible for the most CO2 emissions.
Yeah, and it sounds like they might actually end up doing that. I mean, if they're going to force you to stay within a carbon budget, they're going to have to track how much carbon you burn. And similar proposals are being called for by MPs in Britain, and some are calling for every adult to use a carbon ration card when they pay for petrol, airline tickets, or household energy.
So they're tracking every time that you're using...
Every time you basically you use energy.
Wonderful. Sounds good for me. Sign me up. I want the government to be attuned to every time that I'm using any kind of energy or releasing any kind of CO2.
Quite honestly, I think they're using what's still a pretty, in my opinion, tentative scientific theory, and they're using it as an excuse to tax people, which is what governments always do. And it's not even clear to me how giving all of this money in this proposal, let's tax people, give the money when you burn too much release too much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We're going to tax you, take money, give it to developing nations, and what do you think those developing nations are going to do with that money?
Oh, so develop their power plant.
Yeah, probably
more like the Western counterparts.
Probably buy things that were made, releasing carbon dioxide, or build infrastructure so that they themselves can burn more fuel and release more carbon dioxide. So the proposal to me doesn't even make any sense, and quite honestly, I think it's just a scheme to tax people.
Yeah. Well, this whole climate change thing, while the climate may be changing, I think that the exact causes are still up in the air a little bit. While things are definitely changing a little bit, what's interesting is exactly who's responsible and all this stuff. Well, it is a huge multi-billion dollar industry. A lot of people are really making money off this thing. So if you're tracking the money of who's getting this, I think it's some interesting research. If you're ever bored out there, you want to see who's making money off climate change, this whole push to go green in the world. There's billions of dollars at stake, and there's a lot of lobbyists, a lot of business, a lot of corporations really invested in this global climate change and humans being responsible. So don't always believe everything you hear. Do your own research and follow the money.
Yeah, I mean, T. Boone Pickens was an oil tycoon, but now he's pushing for wind and solar energy. It just so happens that he wants the U.S. to adopt his plan, and I'm sure he has all kinds of ways set up to make money off of using these new energy sources that it really doesn't make economic sense to use them in most cases yet. But
yeah, the technology will grow there.
I think there is a case that can be made. I think there's no reason to burn fossil fuels that do pollute when you don't have to. But I think that transition is going to naturally be made once wind and solar and other alternative energies that actually make sense and actually save more carbon dioxide emissions than they cause. I think those will make sense to use once they're affordable and competitive with fossil fuel, and we're not there yet.
I think the matter of the fact is every single drop of oil will eventually be burnt up, and then we'll switch from there. That's just what's going to happen until it's economically feasible,
And oil prices are going up already. There's less and less easily accessible oil. Oil prices are going to go up.
It'll make other forms
more attractive, whether that be nuclear or wind or solar, whatever it actually ends up being. But a lot of people out there are trying to make money, and they're pushing ideas that don't actually make sense for the environment or economically, like when they were pushing corn ethanol. That's a terrible fuel, it doesn't make sense to use to save carbon dioxide emissions, and it also drives up food prices. So there's all kinds of costs associated with some of these solutions that are being proposed, and they're being proposed by people who'll make money off the solutions that they're proposing.
Yeah, follow the money. Anyways, we do need to move on. We have a lot more to get to. We picked on the UK, we picked on Germany. I wanted to bring it back over here to the United States because, well, we do asinine things all the time, or at least our so-called representatives do. This coming down on the federal level, where the U.S. Congress is proposing charging a tourist fee to all people who are visiting the United States. Now, the reason for this fee would be to collect money in order to advertise across the world for people to come to the United States. And I think that the people who are actually thinking out there watching this show will see, well, you're charging people money who visit the United States to promote tourism. Well, these people already visited the United States, so they're paying for other... Anyways, it gets pretty... If you're following the logic of this, it's pretty convoluted. But one thing I did want to point out here is the United States has messed up its image in the world by occupying other nations, going to war, and really doing horrible things. We're proposing to fix this by charging people money who visit the U.S. How about we fix our foreign policy and we get tourists to come back because they like America, not because we're charging them money and having a huge advertising campaign?
Yeah, I mean, when people come to the United States, and now they're faced not only with the TSA and an onerous customs process that is pretty strict compared to a lot of other countries out there, but now the proposal is to hit them with a fee as soon as they enter the United States and say, welcome to America, now you have to pay us $10.
Welcome to the land of the free, it costs $10 to get in.
And you know,
it's an amusement park.
I haven't traveled all that much, but I've never heard anyone I know who does, and I do know quite a few people who travel quite a bit, talk about paying a entry fee to get into a country, and I never paid that when I went to Canada.
And I don't think I'd want to visit somewhere that did charge an entry fee. I mean, yeah, I got it. I wanted to come as a tourist to the United States and pay a fee so you can advertise to get more other people to come here.
Tourists are already
charging the people who already came to the United States, made the decision to come to the United States and give us their tourism, and we're going to charge them a fee for that. I mean,
well, and they're already spending money in the United States. I mean, tourists are already coming. If they're on vacation or even if they're on a business trip, they're already benefiting the U.S. economy.
Why do we point.
Exactly.
Squeeze every penny out
of
them. Well,
tourism is down significantly since 9/11.
Because we've done horrible things in the world, Nick. That's why.
Well, I don't know if it's so much the foreign policy. The foreign policy probably puts some people off, but just the airport security and the scrutiny that people from other countries get, you know, being suspected of terrorism, even if there's really no reason to suspect them, people don't like that, and I wouldn't like that. I wouldn't want to go to a country where I, think there's a good chance I might be held in some room for questioning for 3 or 4 hours after I come across, after I enter that country. If I thought that was going to happen to me when I went to Canada, I wouldn't go to Canada, or certainly not as often. Well, because nobody wants that to happen when they're on vacation. They don't want to have to worry about stuff like that. And they can go to England or France or Canada and get relatively the same experience as the United States in some cases. Canada's pretty similar. And they don't have to deal with that threat of being unreasonably searched or detained. And that if this passes, they're not going to have to deal with a $10 fee.
Well, welcome to the land of the free, Nick. Anyways, we do need to move along. It's time to let the people know how they can at least let the representatives know how they're feeling, the ones in the Congress and the Senate. With the Downsizer Dispatch, what do we have on tap for this week, Nick?
Well, this week's Downsizer Dispatch is focusing on the fact that former Vice President Dick Cheney has essentially been celebrating the supposed success of torture as an interrogation method, and Cheney is basically claiming that waterboarding and sleep deprivation got Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to turn over all kinds of information, basically become the best informant or information source the CIA had on al-Qaeda. And of course it seems he did provide some information to the US government, but it's indirect. What Cheney is saying is in direct conflict with what CIA agents are saying. A number of CIA agents are saying that they interrogated Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, but specifically this agent's Deuce Martinez, he said he used traditional interrogation methods and did not inflict pain and panic. And actually all of the good information they received was before they decided to torture this guy. And even if the claims Cheney were making were true, it still doesn't justify torturing people. Even if once in a while you're going to get decent intelligence out of torturing people, I mean, if you're going to say that that justifies torture, then why not torture people all the time? Why just torture terrorists? Why not torture anybody who's accused of a criminal offense if it's, you know, a moral and respectable way to get information out of somebody? It's just not. And you can go to downsizedc.org if you agree with us, and go to the I Am Not Afraid campaign and tell your representatives that you don't want to become just as bad as terrorists and people who murder and torture. Because that's exactly what we're doing when we say that torture is okay if once in a while it works.
It's a very slippery slope. You are correct, Nick. But we do need to take a quick break. When we come back, the story about the llama and, of course, what the new threat is, and a whole lot more. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. This is Free Minds TV.
Free Minds TV is brought to you in part by Life Productions for your basic and semi-pro video production needs. From full wedding and event coverage to DVD authoring and distributions, lifeproductions.com. That's lyfproductions.com.
Log on to freemindstv.com for archives of the show, the Free Minds Radio podcasts, show content and the forum, ways to donate, the members section, contact info, and a whole lot more, all at freemindstv.com.
Hey, Ridley Report, Ridley here from RidleyReport.com, RidleyReport.com, at Ridleyography, I am the bomb. And I just want to tell you, you're watching FreeMindsTV.com, and they're like really cool, so you should keep watching them. FreeMindsTV.com, they are good.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. It is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
And we'd like to invite the viewers to log on to our website. freemindsmedia.org is the address. From there, there's the archives of the show, the radio side, ways to help the side. The members area, which is only $3 a month or $30 a year, contains tons of bonus material, plus every single archive dating back to episode 1. We're now in 126, so tons of content up there, bonus videos, bonus radio shows, all at freemindsmedia.org. All right, I wanted to move right along because we have a ton of content left to get to and not much time. I wanted to start off by going over to Wichita, Kansas, where a young boy has unfortunately died. And while we don't know if this could have been prevented, well, there's a possibility that it could have. A grandma by the name of Pam Jordan called 911 after her grandson, a 3-year-old grandson, Isaiah Jones, had disappeared. She called 911 to report a missing persons case. While the police were en route to her home, she noticed that her grandson was floating in her swimming pool out back. She pulled him out, noticed that he was not breathing, and began CPR. After doing CPR for a few minutes, she noticed that the color in his lips began to return to more, and his pulse became stronger. Police arrived on the scene and told the grandmother, Pam Jordan, that she needed to move away from the child and cease her CPR. She asked the police officer if he was going to take over for her, and he just told her to move out of the way. Well, she did move out of the way, and the police officer just left the boy there for a few more minutes until more police officers arrived and attempted to give the boy CPR. Well, he didn't make it, and now the boy's family is asking the question, why? Why did the initial police officer who showed up on the scene tell the grandmother to stop doing CPR if he was not going to take over, especially when it was showing signs that the CPR was working? Now, while this is a very tragic story, we'll never actually know if there was a chance for this boy to live, because we were never given that chance. So the question is just why? Why? Why would this police officer do this? No one has any idea.
There probably aren't any answers for it. He was probably, I mean, maybe they have procedures, but it seems to me if you've got somebody who's in the process of giving CPR or some other kind of critical care, you're best to just let them keep doing that if you're not qualified or not willing to take over yourself, whether you're a police officer or not.
But I mean, if it was someone other than the police officer, she would have just been like, okay, I'm not going to stop. No way, I'm giving him CPR. It's actually working. I'm not going to stop, but because he had a badge and he has the authority, he was also a 20-year veteran on the force, this particular police officer. She assumed that he was going to take over, but he ordered her to stop, and the boy died. Unfortunate, but what are you going to do? We do need to move on. We've got a whole lot more to get to. We will talk about the llama from last week. People who are watching, I know you're on the edge of your seats to hear what happened. Renegade llama on the lam from the cops. We'll get to that. But first, we have to go over to China and talk a little bit about monetary policy and how that's affecting us over here in the U.S. This is really a follow-up because we've talked about this many times.
Yeah, and actually, it's more like a story. It's dealing with remarks made by a Chinese official, but it's more like a story of how monetary policy here in the U.S. is affecting people over in China, or at least the government and central bankers in China, and what they think. Cheng Sihui, he was a former vice chairman of the Standing Committee, and now he's head of China's Green Energy Commission, said Beijing was dismayed by the Fed's recourse, the Federal Reserve in the United States, to credit easing. Basically, we all know the Federal Reserve has been injecting massive amounts of money into the economy, supposedly to try to stimulate banks and prop up the system. But the Chinese are a little bit concerned. He said, we hope there will be a change in monetary policy as soon as they have positive growth again. And the reason that China is concerned about how much money the Fed is printing is that China holds a lot of those US dollars, or promissory notes and bonds denominated in US dollars. And they hold some of the largest foreign reserves in the world, totaling more than $2 trillion, the world's largest holder of debt. He said that if they keep printing money to buy bonds, it will lead to inflation. And after a year or two, the dollar will fall hard. Most of our foreign reserves are in US bonds, and this is very difficult to change. So we will diversify incremental reserves into euros, yen, and other currencies. He also went on to say that gold is definitely an alternative to the dollar, but when we buy, the price goes up. So we have to do it carefully so as not to affect the markets. So here you have a Chinese official saying that China is going to start diversifying its holdings of foreign debt, and eventually what that means is probably not going to happen anytime soon, but eventually what that means is that China is going to be inclined to sell some of its reserve holdings denominated in US dollars, especially if they think that the US dollar is going to be devalued sometime soon in the future. Right. The only thing really saving the United States right now is that China holds so much US debt that if China sold a large portion of that debt, they would greatly reduce the value, because
we're also huge trading partners with them, and they don't want to mess up the relationship too much because we have a whole lot of their exports. I mean, we export our dollars to them, and they export us all sorts of trash. Well, not trash. I mean, I buy a lot of it as well, but
it's actually most of our consumer goods.
Most of our consumer goods, but a lot of it is plastic, throwaway crap, and we certainly buy a lot of it. We export dollars. I mean, it's crazy. The #1 U.S. export is dollars, and you can't really do that forever. But we do need to move along. I wanted to get into an update here, talking about the llama. Last week, we reported on a llama in Minnesota, in Waltham, Minnesota, to be specific. A llama who had escaped from his pen and was out on the lam. Authorities caught up with him and tasered the llama. They also, an update from last week, they did attempt to tranquilize him. They tried to taser him a couple of times, and they tried to lasso him. When that failed, they shot him, but he still escaped. And last week, we reported that he was still loose. People should be wary. Well, I don't know, am I pleased or sad to report? The llama's dead. They shot him and he died. So don't be wary of the llama. It's safe to go back outside. The authorities have taken care of him. They've neutralized the threat. But there is a new threat, and we're going to be getting over to that. Nick, you are reporting on what is called a giant woolly rat bear frog. Tell us the latest. Because this llama was one thing. A giant woolly rat bear frog?
I think your notes might be a little bit off. No, it's not. It's actually in New Guinea, and it's a giant woolly rat is all it is. But
where'd the bear and frog come in? That was my imagination.
That was well, there are frogs in this story. But a team of scientists from Britain, the US, and New Guinea have discovered a great number of new species. And this really has nothing to do with what we usually talk about on the show. I just thought it was interesting. Among them was one species of giant woolly rat that I believe they said was 32 inches long, along with 16 species of frogs, one of which, according to the initial reports, has fangs. And a whole lot of other interesting stuff, like a fish that makes grunting noises. Apparently it has a swim bladder, so it has some air in it that it can grunt out. And all of these species were found in a pretty small area. It was found in a...
it's like a giant possum, right? A three foot rat. It's like a possum, right?
Might be a bit bigger than a possum. But basically they were found in the crater of a volcano that's no longer active. They've been...
Are they alive?
Yeah, everything, it's been isolated for about 200,000 years.
Are we at a threat for these giant rat bear frog
no,
fish?
Most of the things in the crater don't seem to be found anywhere outside of this crater. So No, I think we're pretty much safe.
Okay.
The walls of the volcano seem to be holding it in, but it's very interesting that there's still stuff out there that science didn't know about.
Well, I'm sure if authorities don't neutralize this threat, the volcano will take care of this one for us.
Eventually, that might be true.
If they don't, or this doesn't happen, we'll be sure to report on this further to keep people safe. But we do need to move along. I've got one more story to get to about swine flu. It's a little bit of a different article here. We're going over to Sweden, where authorities, well, while they are concerned about swine flu, very much so, they're going to be doing a little bit of a different take on it than isolating people away and forcing them to give vaccines, which is nice. They're going to be fortifying the wine they serve in church with more alcohol. This to not spread the germs and such. So they're going to be putting more alcohol in the wine that is served at church services because a common glass is normally shared with people, and the thought is if you're putting more alcohol in it, and you're sharing the glass, more germs are killed. So just thought that was interesting. That's what they're doing in the Church of Sweden. Do you think this will spread across the world, Nick?
Probably not. I think a lot of people. I mean, a lot of places in Europe and the U.S. people don't go to church all that much anymore either. But maybe.
Well,
I think Americans are more likely just not to sip from the cup or to like want to wipe down the rim with some kind of disinfectant rag.
A rag. Well, I just thought it was interesting to talk about because
Plus,
normally we're talking.
is this even going to work? Because
I don't know.
swine flu is a virus. It's an H1N1 virus, and as I understand it, alcohol typically kills bacteria, but I don't know if it kills viruses.
Well, it's just interesting. I have no idea. I'm not an expert on this.
I'm not a
by any means.
virologist, so I don't know.
A virologist.
I think that's what you call a virus expert.
Not a volcanologist. Are they the ones who discovered the rat, bear, frog, pigs? Anyways, we're out of time, folks. Those last few articles, they were interesting. Not about what we normally talk about on the show, though. We are out of time. Visit us at freemindsmedia.org is the web address where you get the videos, you get ways to help the show, you get ways to contact the show, and a whole lot more. All up at freemindsmedia.org. You can send emails to fmtv at freemindsmedia.org or freemindstv.com, however you want to do that thing. And it has been Toby here with you.
And Nick?
And we'll see you next week. Have a good one.
What are you doing? You're assembled here illegally! And defending the liberty of the citizens of New Hampshire, given to them by God Almighty. Disperse! Lay down your arms! Come up here quietly, one by one. We'll clap you all in irons and give you a fair trial. Come and take the cannons as we took them from you. We'll take them. Take your aim! Turn, front rank! Rear rank! Take your aim! Fire! Front rank!